Thank you guys for coming. I know it's always not a close drive for anyone usually coming out here, so thank you so much. We're so excited to have Dr. Will Tuttle here and his wife Madeline, the artist. Greg and I have been following them for years too, since before he even started the sanctuary. So it's kind of a big deal that they're here. So just a little bit about us, and then I'll introduce Dr. Tuttle and his wife in just a moment. But do you want to talk about Farm of the Free?
Yeah, as most of you know us, I'm Greg and this is Carmen. So we're the founders of Farm of the Free, and we both went vegan in 2013 together. And after a few,
probably around the time we found his book.
First time, maybe
Yeah.
like a year after we went vegan.
Yeah.
And we decided we wanted to do more than just being vegan and stuff. And so we heard of farm sanctuaries, which we've never heard before. We were vegan, and we've always had this passion about rescuing animals, both her and I, which is one of the things that brought us together, rescuing cats and dogs and stuff. And so once we heard of farm sanctuaries, we started volunteering at some, visiting many, and we just kind of talked about creating one and wanting to start one. And so words became actions, and over a few months and a year actually of volunteering at this one sanctuary that we're still really close with in south of Atlanta,
Full Circle
Farm Sanctuary, as some of you might know. We sold our house in Smyrna, Georgia, and moved out here in 2017 in May, and started the sanctuary. So we started real slow. We have how many rescues? 35. And this last year we created this welcome center where we're thankful to have you all here in this space, and we'll have more events and stuff. And we do our potluck vegan potluck volunteer days as well in here and out there. We're just happy that you're here, and hopefully you can join us for many more events.
Okay, so we got Dr. Will Tuttle here. He's an educator, he's a composer, he's a pianist, he's a writer, he's the author of the international bestseller, The World Peace Diet, published in 17 languages. Isn't that awesome? And it's a really great book. And if you're not a reader, it's on tape too. So, like me, I have to listen to it. And he actually reads it, which is really cool. Yeah. He's a peace activist, and he's been vegan for 43 years. He's a recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award and the Empty Cages Award. He's got a PhD from UC Berkeley, focusing on educating intuition and altruism. How cool is that? I didn't know that was a thing. Creator of the World Peace Diet Training Programs. Right. Okay. Has taught college courses in philosophy, humanities, and comparative religion. He's a former Zen monk and Dharma master in the Korean Zen tradition. He's the co-founder of the Worldwide Prayer Circle for Animals. He's currently conducting a music, art, and education ministry with his spouse Madeline, a visionary artist from Switzerland specializing in painting that celebrates the beauty of animals and nature. Madeline is also a flutist, Waldorf teacher, vegan cook and coach, and organic gardener. So, yes, Dr. Will is going to give you his very well-known talk, famous talk about his book. And afterwards, if you guys wouldn't mind just checking out all their books and stuff like that, they have a lot going on with Madeline's artwork and her knitting and books and all their information. So please check it out. So thank you so much for being here. Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so it's really fantastic to be here at Farm of the Free. So let's have a big, huge hand and round of applause for Carmen and Greg. Thanks, you guys, for just so much work, to have a sanctuary, and having volunteers is really beautiful too. So we really appreciate these kinds of efforts. Madeline and I have been blessed with the mission to veganize planet Earth in this incarnation. So here we are, doing our best. And we feel that sanctuaries this is really a beautiful example of a very well-run, clean and bright and beautiful sanctuary. are some of the very most powerful educational institutions to help people awaken out of this delusion of human exploitation and oppression and abuse of animals. And I think when people come here and actually can hear and see and smell and taste and touch and can interact with and see the uniqueness of these individual beings, then it really plants seeds that have huge reverberations into the web of relations, because they change and they tell people, and it's very effective, you know, you can read books, you can watch videos, but to actually see a few, these animals are like precious escapees out of the gulags, and massive. We're killing every day millions of animals, and it's just business as usual. There's no big headline on the New York Times, well, you know, 20 billion animals killed today, because it's just business as usual. But that's what's happening. I mean, when we include marine animals, it gets up into the literally billions every day. So it takes a special, I think, commitment, really, to run a sanctuary. You know, it's a lot of challenging work. These animals are great, but they're very expensive, and they need a lot of loving care, because they've had a hard life before they got here. And you all know, I think, you know, in a way, I have a feeling like you know a lot of what I normally say, because usually when I'm speaking, when Mel and I do these events, it's not vegans in the audience. Usually they're not, or they're thinking about it, or they're interested. It depends, all kinds of different things. But you folks strike me as being pretty savvy about a lot of the stuff. So, but I'll just go through a little bit of some main points I think that are helpful, and then open it up for your questions. There's a lot we can talk about. How many of you have actually read this book? Just so I have a feeling. Actually read it? So we have a few?
Well, yeah. I've listened to it.
Listen to it, that's the same. That's good. That counts. Yeah, so this book is very comprehensive. That's really the main thing. Some people call it the Bible of the vegan movement, because it really gives the big picture of many different dimensions: anthropological, sociological, psychological, spiritual, economic, political, and as well as nutritional and ethical and all that. So it's 13 and a half hours long, and I would love to just hold forth for 13 and a half hours. But as a vegan, I like to really refrain from causing unnecessary suffering to sentient beings. So I'll keep it just to like 40 minutes. I just want to, and then we can open it up for your questions. But I just like to make this picture at the beginning, because I think, a lot of people, when they contemplate transitioning to, say, a vegan way of eating, it's all about health. It's like their health. Either they're doing it because they want to be healthy. They figured out that saturated fat and cholesterol and animal protein, toxic residues, it's like, I'm going to be more healthy. More people, I think, think, oh gosh, if I go vegan, I won't be healthy, and they're afraid. So physical health, it's a big deal in the whole thing. And as a vegan for 40 years now, I mean, more than 40 years, I can only just say it gets better and better and better and better and better. In my experience, it just gets better. And Madeline's also very long-term vegan. And so there's this sort of underlying gossip or whatever. It's not true that long-term vegans, their health deteriorates or whatever. And I just don't think it's true. I mean, I think it's like anything else. If you can do it in various ways. And one of the things I think is important, actually, is that people who are vegan for the animals, not for their health, go vegan for your health too. Because it's not good, really, for our movement, for the animals, when people go vegan and they really think, oh, that looks good. It's like genetically engineered and full of pesticides, but it's vegan, and they're eating it. And our bodies can only tolerate so many toxins, pesticides. And the way the system is set up, the chemical industry and the pharmaceutical industry basically we have the petroleum industry, and then out of that, a subset of that makes much more profits than petroleum is the petrochemical industry. A subset of that makes a lot more profits than the petrochemical industry is the pharmaceutical industry, right? You just keep refining it down, and the amount of money you make goes up. So there's huge forces that are trying to really make us chronically ill, because that's where the big money is. And that's one of the things I talk about, is the fact that we've been vegans for all these years, but we've also taken responsibility for the quality of our health. And I think it's great. We can do that. We can really be aware that the food we're eating is as much as possible organic and whole, and eat in a somewhat contemplative way. I mean, kind of give thanks. A lot of times we're raised in a society where we're taught just the worst habits, like we're eating while we're driving, while we're fighting, while we're doing who knows what, and our body is like, watching, who knows what on whatever. And so I lived in a Zen monastery. The whole idea in a lot of traditions is that our body and mind are not separate. So if we really take time to chew our food plenty of times and give thanks while we're eating it and give thanks while we're preparing it. Now, we prepare the food. Like when I was in a monastery, they only let the seasoned monks prepare the food because there's something called chi or prana, which is the energy. There's something, like we live in a totally materialistic society because of animal agriculture. We need animal agriculture for 10,000 years, where you're selling beings by the pound for 10,000 years. Spirituality is gone, right? It's like, it's all materialism. And so these ancient wisdom traditions, people understood there's more than just matter. There's consciousness, right? We see a cow, we see there's a being in there. But animal agriculture doesn't see a being. It just sees a thing that you buy and sell by the pound. And so after 10,000 years of doing that, even we look at each other like we're objects to be manipulated in a heartless competitive system, and we're kind of manipulating each other as instruments to get what we want, and that's what the system kind of wounds us. That's what happens with animal agriculture. It's always commodifying everything. So I think the more we can understand that, and then take responsibility for our health and see that the food we're eating, that what we are is actually not just a body. We're really consciousness that's in many ways creating our body. So this energy, like I was saying in the monastery, only the seasoned monks, because when they would prepare, they'd be at peace. They'd be, and so when you're meditating for like 14 hours a day, the food, if it's, you can get sensitive to those things, but in our society, we're not that sensitive. We just drive these big cars and crush squirrels, and we don't even feel it. It's like we just kill without even knowing it. So the whole idea is to try to resensitize ourselves to what we're doing, what's happening, which is really that's what veganism is. It's reconnecting with our inherent wisdom that's been kind of crushed out of us from the time we're little kids by being raised in a society that's just based on the strong dominate the weak. That's what it is. Every meal we're eating that. We're trying to create a society of justice and equality, and yet every meal is, though certain beings are inherently superior, other beings are inherently inferior, and it's totally fine for the inherently superior beings to dominate and exploit the inherently inferior beings. That's what we're eating every day. So we might be talking about justice and equality, but our whole body and everything we're doing at a ritualized level, which is much more powerful, is the opposite of that. And so we don't make progress, really. I mean, we make some, but it's kind of like when you really look at the percentage of the super wealthy, how much power and money they have compared to everybody else, it's actually gotten worse than ever. So that's why I think vegan message is the most important one we can spread. The message of animal liberation, really. That's why I love the name, Farm of the Free. That's the key, because these animals are born into slavery through sexual abuse. You can't get anything more demonic and really satanic. It's like the purest evil, if there's such a thing, is to have beings born through sexual abuse only to be mutilated and killed unnecessarily. That's the thing. So the good news in all of this is that all of us have been given this gift. Every human being has been given this wonderful gift of a physical body that does not require any animals to suffer, to get all the nutrients that we need to celebrate our lives on this beautiful earth. How many of you have noticed that the earth is beautiful by now? Anybody? It's so beautiful, we can see it, and the animals are beautiful. And everything is it's a beautiful world. And the only ugliness, really, the main ugliness is animal agriculture. We lived in an RV for 17 years. We traveled all 48 states, well, all 50 states, but in our RV. And monocropping, it's ugly. You just kill everything except for genetically engineered corn or soy. And nature doesn't like that. Nature wants abundance of variety and all kinds of communities. Animal agriculture is like destroy communities, put on just one thing, kill everything else. And so that mentality, really, of violence, we're raised in it. So we don't realize it because it's just everywhere. We don't see how damaging it actually is. But I think for me, after being a vegan for decades, I woke up out of it. I think partly because of doing so much meditation and sort of realizing that my mind had been colonized really by this program as soon as I was born. And I didn't realize it until I just sat in silence for thousands of hours and just watched my mind. And I could realize that every thought, everything, it's just the media, it's the parents, it's everything, creates this momentum of just, and it's kind of robotic. We just sort of do what we're told to do. We're just following authorities. And so what veganism really is, more than anything, is questioning authority, right? Not just the outer, but the inner. What we've already internalized from the time we're little kids, and that's what's so liberating. It's really about freedom. It's about honoring individual beings, the individual beings. That's what's so beautiful. I love when we went around and you knew everyone by name. I think they all kind of look the same to me. I know they're not, but for you knew them. So that sense of honoring the individuals, that they have their own interests, and their interests are as important to them as my interests are to me. That's the bottom line. So I say this all the time when I'm giving lectures, because people are out there and they may not be vegan or vegetarian, but they definitely have a dog or a cat as a companion animal. And I say, how many of you have a companion animal? Oh, they raise their. I said, now would you like it if someone came by and said, boy, your cat looks really good, maybe $3.50 a pound? Would that be good? No, I care about my cat. Don't. So the whole idea is that people live with this incredible split inside their consciousness of I love these animals, but these animals are delicious. So that creates, I think, a lot of the disease that we have in our society. It's just this underlying psychological stress of not being authentic as human beings. And again, I really try not to blame anyone. I think really, when someone is wounded, and people are wounded, I think we're born as little kids with a tremendous, love of nature, of animals, this beautiful planet. Like I said, we all agree. And that makes us want to protect this beautiful earth. But we get wounded because at a certain point we have to eat, and right off the bat, we're getting the flesh and secretions of horrible animals. Just go to a grocery store, you'll see little jars of baby food, and the baby food, there's some is bananas and peas, but a lot of it is cheese and meat. Right off the bat, they're getting that stuff. And from people who they trust completely, right? We all do. So we're wounded. So when people are wounded, you don't kick them and spit on them and yell at them and so forth. The whole idea is to have compassion and try to just be an example of another way of living. And I think that's really effective. That's why I love what you're doing, because you're being an example of like a radical transformation. It's like, these are animals, like these, you're coming along here, and there's what was it called? Faithway Cattle Ranch or whatever, it's like, and so, it's just based on human exploitation. And yet once we realize there's no nutrients that are in animal foods that didn't come from plants. That's it. I mean, every vitamin, mineral, protein, and lipids, and there's no carbohydrates, which we really need in animal foods. There's no fiber, which we really need. So really, eating animals, you could be much better off just eating the plants directly. So that's really where the physical health comes in. When we eat plant-based foods directly, we're going to be healthier in general, because we're not eating the saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying, and inflammatory animal proteins. They're very large proteins. They create a lot of acid. The hospitals are filled because of people with diets high in animal-based foods, and that's obvious. So the pharmaceutical industry, I've discovered, is actually the biggest enemy of veganism. They cannot stand the idea of people being like Madeline and me. I haven't paid any money to a drugstore for anything in 50 years. I haven't gotten one drug, one aspirin, one anything, and or gone to a doctor or had a health insurance. We just stayed out of it. It's nothing to be proud of, and people think, oh, it's just, if we really take responsibility, that's what I feel, and just try to be conscious. Health is not just food. Food is a big part, but it's not that. I mean, there's much more. There's our relationships. A lot of people are sick because they're angry at their parents still, or who knows what. There's exercise, and there's, if we're connecting with nature and living an authentic life. I mean, our body is an instrument to serve us for this lifetime in a certain mission. We have something to do here. And so I think a lot of people can eat even not very healthy food, but they are so passionate about getting something done that their body just does it. Other people are so worried about being healthy that any little thing makes them unhealthy, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think really it's great. I think that's one thing, great things about being a vegan is that once we understand the system, I call it deep veganism, when we understand not just the suffering of animals, but we understand the bigger picture, then we can actually move into our own unique way of being part of the solution. We can begin to spread the message, share the message, maybe start a sanctuary or a cooking class or make some videos or spread the word. And so many different things. It's really only limited, like Madeline, you know, paintings of animals. We make music, all kinds of, you know, give lectures. We've given over, I don't know how many, over 4,000 lectures in over 50 countries, all 50 states. I think one of the things is, you know, when we feel the pain of the animal suffering and the kind of absurdity of the situation, if we're not able to positively transform that pain into action, I think that's the key. You know, it's transforming the pain into action. Because if we don't transform the pain into action, very often it can kind of fester inside of us, and we just start hating humanity. We start not feeling good about ourselves. So it's good to do something. That's what really, I think, you know, human beings, we're here not only to just meditate and contemplate. I mean, we don't do that enough, but it's important. But we really are here to act, right? To do something, to actually create and co-create, cooperate, and create and offer solutions to things. So all these things. So basically, I'll just finish this up. So these are the 5 dimensions of health. Environmental health is just really eroded and harmed enormously by animal agriculture. So the basic idea is that animal agriculture attacks all 5 of these relentlessly and brutally. It's presented to us like some great, wonderful thing. It's how the West was won. It's where you get your protein, how you get your calories. You know, it's presented that way. But in reality, as soon as you pull the curtain back and look at what it's actually doing, it's so wasteful that I don't have to tell you. You guys know. It's just destroying. We're cutting down rainforests now at 3 or 4 acres per second to grow genetically engineered soybeans to feed to cows and pigs and fishes now, and groundwater depletion and air pollution, just the soil erosion, just the massive amount of violence towards this. The greatest thing we could do for the earth is to go vegan. So that, and then cultural health, again, it's attacking our society because it leads to hunger, which is unnecessary. We're growing enough food every year to feed at least 12 to 15 billion people. We have about 8. So we have actually over 1 billion now who are chronically hungry and starving because most of the food we're feeding to these animals, and it's basically the countries that are more industrialized with high-powered economies. We can drive up the price of grain on the world market, feed it to our imprisoned cows and pigs and chickens and factory farm fishes, and people in less industrialized nations who don't have high-powered economies, they can't compete. They just they can't. They go hungry. And they're getting forced off their land by big agricultural operations, and they're forced into cities where they don't know how to work. They were on the land before. So it attacks, it creates war and conflict. And then you have the problem of the workers. And Madeline and I have visited these places, the stockyards and slaughterhouses, and these workers have the highest rates of injuries and among the highest rates of suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, spousal abuse. So it's just waves of trauma going out into wild free-living animals, into indigenous peoples, into hungry people, into the workers, into the society. It's violence towards the animals, and then it's to us, and then it's this trauma that goes really to our own bodies. We're eating misery and terror and fear and pain, despair, anxiety. These poor animals are psychologically traumatized from the time they're born, and just raised. And so, you know, there's really something, when you think about it, to actually endure living in a society where we're selling literally every day millions of animals by the pound as if they were sacks of cement. I mean, it's inconceivably detrimental to our mental health and spiritual health. Like Krishnamurti said, it's not a good idea to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. You know, that's basically what veganism is. It's like, I'm not going to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. I'm going to do whatever I can to try to be part of us creating a more sane society, a more conscious society. And we do that through communities, really. So the good news, though, is that we have to keep celebrating is that a plant-based diet provides every nutrient we need to thrive and without all the toxins. You know, especially when we do as much as possible to have it be healthy, organic, plant-based, whatever, whole foods, not just Oreos and whatever. And so the idea is, I won't look up there. No, but the idea is, I mean, it's good to have foods that are transition foods too.
Yes.
I mean, it's good. It's good to have people that are eating animal food that like, they you know, if they ate really healthy foods, they'd probably like have a heart attack. I'm just kidding. No, they'd clean out, and a lot of times when people clean out, they feel worse while they're cleaning. You know, that's part of the thing. You know, they're detoxing. And they say, oh, I tried. Actually, the detoxing was great. If they would just get through it, they'd come out on the other side, you know. But the physical health thing, we can talk a long time about that. But the basic idea is really, it's important to just understand that our whole system, I have a whole chapter in the World Peace Diet that goes in, that our system is really ideally created, our teeth, our everything, our dentition, our jaw structure, our digestive system, circulatory system. It's definitely not for meat, and for sure it's not for dairy, right? We're not little calves. I always say this to people. I say, if you'd like to know if you're one of those people who can really thrive on dairy products or who can do pretty well on them, there's a good test to check. Just go, after the lecture's over, go home. When you go home, go into the bathroom and just turn on the light, look in the mirror, and if you see a little calf, then go ahead, have some dairy. But if you don't see a calf, no, it's really not food for you. And like you were saying, people even use goats and sheep for dairy, and it's all violence, and none of it's healthy. We're not these animals. The other aspects are the psychological and spiritual, and these in some ways are more important because that has to do with the inner landscape of our consciousness, which is also attacked by animal agriculture. It doesn't just attack the environment and the society and our health. Where it does the most damage to people is the attitudes that we have to adopt to live here, especially if we're eating the foods, right? And I go through a whole long list of the different attitudes. I won't do that now, but a couple of the main ones. One is the loss of intelligence, basically, because the underlying mentality when we're sitting at a table and eating animal foods is don't make the connection, right? It's just bacon. It's cheese. It's an egg. We do not want to think deeply and talk about and explore where it came from. That would be like taboo, because we wouldn't enjoy it. I say that to people sometimes. Would you like to know, where your bacon came from? And they say, no, I want to enjoy my bacon. Don't tell me. They don't want to know. So people know that. So the problem is that the capacity to make connections, that is the definition of intelligence. So when we live in a society where the main ritual in the society is routinely 3 times a day, very often, at least 2 to 3 times a day, we're routinely practicing disconnecting. You're basically dumbing down the entire culture, collectively and individually, both cognitively, but also even, I think, more seriously, emotionally. It's sort of like numbing ourselves. I don't care about cows. We don't care about pigs. We don't care about chickens. We don't care about turkeys. We don't care about fishes. We don't care. We sort of just put on the blinders. It's like we don't put them on. They're put on us. They're slapped on us. Very often by people who love us, like our parents, teachers, but because it goes through the generations. So that's the situation. It's like our intelligence gets reduced, and when that happens, it works very well in a way for the wealthy elite to just kind of control everybody and in many ways treat us like livestock. Like we treat them like livestock. That's one of the things I used to teach college courses in comparative religion, and the world's religions have a lot of wisdom in them, actually. And one of the main wisdoms is the golden rule. They all have the golden rule. Don't do to others what you wouldn't have done to yourself. I mean, if we would really live by that, we would have and include animals, beings who are sentient, that would transform everything. That's the golden rule. And the mirror teaching that goes with that is whatever you sow, so shall you reap. Right? Whatever you put out is going to come back. So that basic understanding, we should know if we're going to insist on brutally oppressing and exploiting and treating as livestock these free-living, amazingly intelligent beings who thrived in nature for millions of years before we came along and violently ripped them out. If we're going to insist on doing that, what makes us think that we're not going to start getting viewed as livestock by people who have more power and control, just like we do over them? See, that's the thing. If we want to be free, that's why I love the farm of the free. Like when we liberate animals, only then will we be really worthy of actually a world of freedom and peace and justice and equality. Until then, we're not worthy of it because we're stealing it from these beings who are in our hands, and we just crush them with no respect. We don't respect them. So it's this is the thing. So the psychological, and the other, there's quite a few different ones, but the other one I'll just mention is the domination of the sacred feminine, because that's really the core of animal agriculture. People don't think of that. They think, oh, it's humans dominating animals, but more accurately, it's female animals, because they're the ones that give birth, and so they're sexually abused on what is called rape racks. The babies are stolen and killed, and then it's over and over again. It's the same thing. And so again, to live in a society that is engaging in sexual violence millions of times every day, and not just, and the thing is, people take out their wallets, and I always remind people that these are ballots that always get counted. Everybody says, I don't know about this, who's counting the ballots, but these ballots always get counted. And if we're voting for, paying for, and voting for animal-based foods, we're paying people to do work that brings out the worst in them. Animals are horrible, the terrible suffering of the animals. And so that's where the real violence actually happens, is in the purchasing. But then we not only cause all that, then we turn around and we actually eat it. Right? People eat the violence that they're causing, which shuts them down even more. And it's the sacred feminine, really. And so that's one of the things I talk in the World Peace Diet about Sophia, who was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. And the basic idea, I think, with these ancient deities is that they're not just out, they're inside us. They're basically inside. They represent a capacity that we have, and that Sophia capacity is beautiful. I mean, that's the capacity within a human being, especially within women, but in men, all of us have this capacity to love and nurture and protect life. But if you have little kids raised in animal agriculture where they're forced to eat animal foods, violence, then that just erodes Sophia. It just suppresses Sophia to the point where she's not able really to rise up and protect animals and ecosystems and communities and so forth. And that's great for the corporations and the governmental systems based on violence, and they can have their way. So I always say, veganism is the resurrection of Sophia. This is Sophia rising up in us as saying no, stop this violence towards animals. And yes, really to compassion and kindness and respect and love and freedom and liberation. And that's related to, all this is related to spiritual health. Spiritual health and ethical health, those are really the same thing that has to do with purpose. That we're on this earth with a purpose. And that's one of the greatest wounds I think we go through. Sometimes when we speak at universities, and I ask the students if they have thought deeply about their purpose in life. And you just get a feeling, it's like, no, we know what our purpose is. It's to get a good job so we can have money so we can buy a lot of stuff. So we live in this perverse society where those who are the most highly respected, successful, are those who cause the most destruction of everything. They can have a private jet and really let it rip, and those are the ones who make the decisions about how we should live our life. So the reason that it is that way is because we routinely steal the purposes from millions of animals every day. And what happens? As you sow, you reap. So we steal their purposes, and we end up having a society where people have lost their purpose. So this is where I think we really see the healing coming, where we begin, each one of us, to reconnect with our purpose and realize that we're only here for a few short decades. They go by really quickly. So how do we live our life authentically? This for this being, not trying to. We don't have to compare ourselves to anybody else. Just what is my what is mine to do here? What is this for me to do? And to create that every day. And when we connect with that purpose, then we're connecting with the real power, because we are creative consciousness. And when we start coming up with ideas and working and talking, we have tremendous capacities to heal not only ourselves and in our world, locally, but really to reach a lot of other people. There's tremendous interconnectedness available to us now. And so all these things go together. And I think the thing that's interesting, and I'll just try to do this shorter, but this is the historical part. In the second chapter of the World Peace Diet, I talk a little bit about the idea of herderism, which is a word I coined. I think it's really the core of our society. We're a herding society. We're based on herding animals and owning them as property. We never think of ourselves. It took me 25 years to realize that, actually, and to articulate it, that it's just now the herding of animals is industrialized and computerized, and it's far away. It's invisibilized. We don't see it, and it just wraps in saran wrap. It ends up wrapped up in saran wrap. But that has led to these things. So it started 10,000 years ago in Iraq, when people started owning wild sheep, then wild goats, then later wild cows and other animals. All animals were reduced to being either commodities that you eat or that are pests. So humans started to feel this separation from nature, and we own, and we're afraid of nature. This whole disconnection from nature is based on animal agriculture, based on violence and ownership. And so that led, for the very first time, to this wealthy elite class. See, that's one of the biggest problems we have in our society today, is that we have this wealthy elite class. But that arose thousands of years ago as the kings, and they were wealthy and powerful because they owned capital. The old word capita means head, as in sheep and goats. And so we have these proto-capitalists that were wealthy because they owned a lot of capital, which was sheep and goats, livestock, basically. And so then they dominated their society, and then they created war. There had never been war until we started our war on animals, basically. And the old word gavya from Sanskrit means the desire for more cows, the oldest word for war that we know of. Because when someone would see another king with a lot of capital, he would say, well, I want to get that capital. So he would have a big battle. There'd be big, huge fights like they'd never had before, these wars. And whoever lost the war would lose, not only all their livestock would become the property of the victor, their land and their water, but even them, they would get enslaved. So then we had, for the very first time, we had slavery. We still have it today, it's trafficking. So all these things, these two institutions are the most devastating, I think, on our planet. And they're still going strong because we're still, that's the most devastating, but these are all products of that. And then the domination of the feminine, because the female is now starts to be seen merely as a breeder. So she's just seen as something to be used sexually rather than to be respected, because that's what they're doing over and over again, generation after generation. They're just trying to breed these animals. Then they start manipulating the breeding. Really, the manipulating of the breeding, quite honestly, that was the beginning of science. Science has always been about dominating and exploiting nature, predict and control. It's really what it is. And that led, of course, to boys being wounded, and boys had to become hard and tough and capable of violence against animals and rival herders. And so we had this rising of a very violent, warlike society in the Eastern Mediterranean, and it spread into the Northern Mediterranean, into Central Asia, to Europe. They spread from there through the colonial period, and we're born into it. It just spread ever since. I call it the military, industrial, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex. So you have that vast complex, and it works very well to suck the wealth and the power to a tiny elite, and they profit from this whole thing. They control everything. But for us to cooperate with that is ridiculous. Why would we go along with such a system that enslaves animals and us, really, to disease, and to war, and to trafficking and everything else? So the good news, again, of course, in all of this is we're not just critiquing a system, we have this wonderful alternative, and the sanctuary is a perfect example of that, where we, ultimately we won't need sanctuaries. The animals will be, my vision is when we all go vegan, then we only need a fraction of the land to grow food. So we could have most of the land could go back to being wild, forests and prairies and jungles, and so there's plenty of habitat for all the animals, and they can go back, and they're all living already except for cows. They're all the last free living cow was killed in Poland in the 1600s, but they could all go back. They could all go back to be living really freely. That's the vision. This is temporary. This is a beautiful halfway mark.
Yes.
Halfway step, because they still, if you let them loose in the forest, But once we get back into balance, that's the thing. But anyway, so this local, organic, whole food, plant-based. I think that's really the best. Ahimsa means nonviolence. So the whole idea is to try to, just realize that we can have abundance and healthier ecosystems, economies, people, justice, freedom, equality, harmony, and peace. There's nothing stopping us from this. We're not. This idea, we're taught, I think, somehow that we humans are sort of this naturally violent, kind of vicious creature. It's not. I really don't think it's true. I think we're basically loving and cooperative, but we're born into a society with a very obsolete food system that warps us from the time we're little kids, and shuts down a lot of our natural wisdom and compassion and empathy. And we're forced to function in a system that hardens our hearts in many ways. So it's all about reconnecting with the beauty that we are, actually, and living in the beauty that the earth is, our true nature, really. And so this is the thing. And so this kind of sums up a little bit of it. I like this, the cow in the room. Animal agriculture, really. One single industry causes so much harm. Dead zones, diabetes, pandemics, rainforests disappearing, violent society, global warming is unstoppable, angioplasty, 800 million people are starving, California is running out of water. That's it. I mean, it's causing all these problems. And I think what Madeline shows in her paintings and what you guys are doing with your sanctuary is that these animals are beautiful. They can definitely fit into ecosystems like they did for millions of years. We're not doing them any favors by pulling them out. And, some people say, well, if they were out in nature, they'd be suffering. I mean, only slaves would ever say that. I mean, freedom and being part, fulfilling one's destiny as nature intends, that's really the thing. So I think once we begin to connect with these beings, this is what we try to plant, this idea that these animals are beautiful, and they have tremendous wisdom and capacities that we take away from them by putting them into confinement. And so I think I'm kind of almost at my time. I'll just say a couple more words and we can open it up for your questions. I'll just say, just briefly, like I mentioned earlier, I think that one of the most powerful things we can understand is that the only reason anyone eats animal foods is because we're just following orders. That's the only reason. I did it. We all do it. Anyone you meet, when we leave here and we see people eating animal foods, it's because they're following orders that were very often, like in my case, injected into me from infancy by very loving, well-meaning people. My mother wanted me to get plenty of protein and calcium. But once we understand that, then we can see the power of community. We eat animal foods because of the communities we're raised in. We're like little sponges when we're born. We just soak it up. Their food becomes my food. Their attitudes become my attitudes. So if we can create alternative communities based on compassion and caring and sensitivity and rationality, basically, then we give people, we open the door of the prison for them. Like someone comes here and they see an alternative community. They see a community where animals are respected, where their dignity is honored, where there's a spirituality that's just inherent in this, that honors and sees beings, as sacred expressions of life. Right there, they're getting a taste of another community, and that's planting a seed. It goes deep, really. And then when they interact with the animals and so forth. So anytime we can create any kind of community situation, like maybe a Facebook group even, or a restaurant, or a cooking class, or a book study group, or even conversations, or veg fest. I mean, all these things are communities. They may be temporary, they may be whatever, but they're in a certain place. But the more of those, the better. We can even create our own house where we live. It's a space of love. It's a community, and people who come as part of it. So I think that's the key. And then we begin to realize, like our natural wisdom, when we look at this, we see how plant-based foods are naturally attractive. They're delicious, they're appealing, they draw us toward them, and we really help the plants. A lot of people, we really help spread the seeds around. It's a beautiful thing. You know, I can talk a long time about that, but one of the things that's so interesting is just, we have a food forest where we live in Northern California. We lived in an RV for 17 years, traveling around North America. All we could grow was sprouts on the counter, but now we have a little bit of land, like a quarter of an acre. We have 70 fruit trees and 6 raised beds of vegetables, lots of herbs and berries and things. And we create a whole community where there's lots of insects, beneficial insects and birds, and it's a whole ecosystem that you can kind of create. And so that it feeds us and we feed it. It's like this beautiful, the plants love us and we love them. The more we love them, the more they love us. You know, it's like this. So when we see that picture she had before, and then we see this, and when we see this, we don't think, oh, my mouth is watering. I can't wait to just have the hot blood in my mouth. You know, that's so foreign to us. We've been hijacked so much to go and just eat pork or ham or bacon. It's just the only way it can be done is by really deadening our natural, not only the logic, but the empathy and the capacity we have to see. So veganism is really about healing. It's about healing these wounds and creating communities. And I'll just close with this little story. In my own life, I was raised in Massachusetts back in the 1950s, and eating a lot of meat, dairy, and eggs, the typical thing everybody ate. And I remember when I was about 7, I asked my mother, I said, Mom, the kind of foods we're eating, is this what everybody eats? And she said, yes, this is what everybody eats. And I said, okay, thanks. And then she left. And then she came back and she said, I have to correct myself. That wasn't totally true. There are vegetarians. And I had never heard that word in my life. So I said, what's a vegetarian? I was kind of curious. And she thought about it for a minute, and then she said, don't worry about it. You're never going to meet one. It doesn't matter. And she said, I don't know where they get their protein. And so I had this image of these vegetarians as these pathetic people that didn't get enough, because I knew at 7 years old, protein is like the main thing, got to get your protein. And so I was so glad I wasn't a vegetarian. I thought that must be the worst thing, these pathetic, stupid vegetarians. And I remember when I was a little bit older, about 13, 14 years old, for a few years, I went away to a summer camp in Vermont that was affiliated with a beautiful little dairy nestled in the Green Mountains of Vermont. And it was a farm. And we did different things. One of the things I had to do, though, I remember, was catch a chicken and hold her down with one hand and have my axe in the other hand and cut her head off, and then put her, after she stopped running around, then put her through the scalding tank. And then we ate the chickens. And I remember I didn't like doing it, but I felt like I was doing the right thing. It was kind of like this initiation into adulthood. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. Because I'd gone through 13 years of the most intense indoctrination you can go through by people I loved and trusted. You've got to eat these certain animals, only these, and they taste good. And if you don't eat them, you're going to die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. This is how it had been set up. And so I participated in that, and also just the dairy. I mean, the dairy thing, it was interesting, because every year we would gather around a cow who was too old to give enough milk. She was 5 years old. It's like amazing. I mean, cows will live 25 years, but that's important to understand. On any dairy, organic or not, when the cows reach 5 years old, they're worn out, because they've been kept pregnant and lactating simultaneously, usually through at least 4 to 5 pregnancies by that point. Every 9 months, they do it again. And so these poor animals are just so abused, even on organic dairies, that they just kill them, because it's cheaper to kill them. And like the guy said, well, we can't use it for milk, so we're going to use it for meat. And then one of her babies will be a slave on the dairy, and they'll just start impregnating her. They put them on prolactin or something so they can come into heat early and start having babies. And so I saw that. I mean, we slaughtered. I mean, we really. I mean, these are big. These are like 2,000-pound huge cows. So it was kind of traumatic, I think, for me to be part of that. We put a gun right to the cows, and we just keep pulling the trigger until she finally crashed. And this is a good old, like these little farms where nothing bad ever happens. I mean, this is what's going on behind the scenes. You don't want to be an animal on these places. And So I won't go into that more, but the basic idea for me was I saw all that, but I was still way too programmed to really seriously question it. And but the good thing was that, like I said, I went away to college in Maine, and I heard there were some vegetarians, so I never met one, like my mother said, you'll never meet one, but they're around somewhere, you know. That was back in the early 70s. And then in 1975, I left home with my brother, and we decided we were going to go on a spiritual pilgrimage and walk from Massachusetts to California. And we started walking west, and we got as far as Buffalo, and then it was getting cold. It was like October and freezing. So we just walked south. We actually walked all the way down through upstate New York and Pennsylvania and across Kentucky into West Virginia into Kentucky and then into Tennessee. And when we got into Tennessee, we stopped at one point at a place called The Farm. And The Farm was the largest hippie commune in the world back in 1975. They were pretty much all from California. And so there's about 900 people living there, and they were all vegetarians. And they were living that way, and they were actually vegans. I mean, we couldn't say vegan back then because it was an unknown word. Like, no one ever heard of it. But they said, we're vegetarians. So there was no meat, no dairy or eggs, no honey. And even one guy was telling me about it, and he said, I'm wearing vegetarian shoes too. So my mind was getting blown like this. I said, what's the reason you're doing all this? And he said, well, there's two main reasons. Number one, most of the food we're growing in this country is we're feeding it to animals while people are starving, and that's causing war, conflict. So we're eating lower on the food chain so there's enough for everyone to eat. And the other reason, he said, is do you know what the animals go through that we're eating? And I said, don't tell me, you know, but he told me a little bit of just the routine mutilation and the horrible abuse that these poor animals are going through, not only for meat, but for leather and for everything. And so, so that was it. I never ate meat in my life, actually, since that day in 1975, because of the example of those people. Because every day we were eating together. It was like, you know, hippie food. It was like a lot of soybeans and stews and veggies and stuff. But so I had to learn how to do it, but I was neat because I met Madeline years later and we compared notes, and I found out, you know, the same month and year in Switzerland, she also decided to never eat meat in her life again. And then a few years later, in 1980, I figured out the dairy and egg thing, so I became a vegan. I was in San Francisco at that point. And then a few years later, I decided to become a monk, a Zen Buddhist monk. I was living in meditation centers, and then I went over to South Korea, and I was living in this monastery there called Songwangsa. And I realized I was in a community that had been practicing vegan living for 750 years. So this is the power. See, that's what I mean, the power of community. The only reason I could go vegetarian originally was because of The Farm. There was a community, and they were doing it. And so just being in that community, it was like a no-brainer. I was like, they were thriving, they were healthy, nobody was dying of a protein deficiency. They had about 200 kids that were vegan from birth. They were doing great. They were teaching us how to make tofu, and they were even started to make tempeh, and they had the very first non-dairy ice cream ever made anywhere in the world. It was made right by us, right there. It was called Ice Bean. It was terrible, but we thought it was pretty good. You know? And but anyway, so that was you know. So I got in really at the very beginning of all this in a way, but it was that community, right? And then later, being in Songwangsa, the second time I met in my life, I was in a vegan community, living. But the fact that it had been like that for centuries, no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather, no killing mosquitoes even. You just wouldn't do it. You would never, like a mosquito would land, you just, bless her, you know? It's like, you can't kill. It's like, you don't know, it was based on ahimsa. So that gave me this feeling of having these roots of veganism that went much deeper, because I realized it's not just this sort of option. Oh, I think I'll try vegan. It's really nothing to be proud of. It's our true nature. It's who we are, actually. It's this coming home to our own heart and seeing beings when we see beings, rather than seeing commodities when we see beings. It's just having our eyes back again and our heart back. And so coming back to this culture eventually, it was hard because there's so much violence and separateness and people just running around. And I got my PhD at Berkeley, and then I started realizing that I was teaching a lot of college courses back then. And eventually I thought, well, I think it'd be better to just go on the road. So I bought a Volkswagen, I had an old Volkswagen bus, 1971. So I started living in that and doing playing the piano and doing workshops on developing intuition. I met Madeline in Switzerland, And she came over and we started doing that together with music and art and intuition, and then spreading the vegan message also. And I remember telling her, most of the vegan movement the problem is that people don't realize how big the whole thing is. People think it's just three things. It's bad for the animals, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for your health. And I said, there's so much more. I mean, that's part of it, but there's the whole spiritual dimension, the psychological dimension, the cultural dimension, the history and anthropology of it. I mean, people have to understand, because I've done so much research, not only outer research, but a lot of inner. And so I said, I know somebody's going to write a book that'll give the big picture of animal agriculture and the consequences of the whole thing. And she said, yeah, somebody will write a book like that. And then at one point she said, I think if you want to read that book, then you might have to write it first, and then you can read it. So I really didn't want to hear that, because I knew it was going to be a lot of work. But I spent 5 years, and this was the result.